One conversation related to this entire affair.
Our question today: has Jody Wilson-Raybould's secret recording changed your mind about the SNC-Lavalin affair? Call us at 1-888-416-8333. That's 1-888-416-8333.
I do not have an independent recollection of the event. I did not wear a wire, record the conversation.
It's a surreptitious recording that gets to the heart of the SNC-Lavalin controversy. On Friday, former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould offered new evidence to the parliamentary committee investigating the SNC-Lavalin affair: texts, emails, and a recording of a tense phone call last December between Ms. Wilson-Raybould and the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick. She knew it was being recorded. He did not. The call makes clear the former Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister were on a collision course over how to handle the SNC-Lavalin criminal case and what constitutes political interference. We'd like to know what you think about the taped conversation and the new information it brings to light. This story has dominated the national political agenda for over a month. It's brought about resignations of Justin Trudeau's right-hand man, 2 cabinet ministers, and the country's top bureaucrat. The Prime Minister has tried turning the page. The opposition parties still want accountability. Once again, we're turning it over to you today. Our question: has Jody Wilson-Raybould's secret recording changed your mind about the SNC-Lavalin affair? The number again, 1-888-416-8333. Many are asking, is it legal to secretly record phone calls like Jody Wilson-Raybould did? Later in the show, an employment lawyer will explain the law on this to us and why it's embroiling the legal community in ethical debates. Also, there was an honor feast yesterday for the former Attorney General, put on by her home community, the Wee-Wee-Kai First Nation. We'll talk with a reporter who was there and find out what he saw and heard. Stay with us for that. You can also send us an email to checkup@cbc.ca or join the conversation on social media. You can chat in real time on our Facebook live stream or share your thoughts on Twitter @CheckupCBC. I'll be reading your comments throughout today's show. I'm Duncan McCue on CBC Radio 1 and online at cbc.ca. This is Cross Country Checkup.
It's very difficult to sort of assert across the board what the legality of recordings made without someone's consent is going to be. But clearly in the context of Jody Wilson-Raybould and Michael Wernick, I guess the question has been asked, is that appropriate? Is it ethical?
I don't disagree that it's inappropriate. I mean, she should have told him that it was being recorded. And, this is all coming out of her playbook. If you're looking at this from a communications perspective, she's kind of letting this play out, and she clearly was navigating the conversation.
So much of what was being discussed on that call is inappropriate. And clearly, she's being pressured.
It is no longer a he said, she said scenario. Canadians can now hear and judge themselves if Jody Wilson-Raybould was pressured in the SNC-Lavalin case. Here's part of the 17-minute telephone conversation between the former Attorney General and Michael Wernick.
The PM wants to be able to say that he has tried everything he can, within a legitimate toolbox to try to head that off. So he's quite determined, quite firm, that he wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, isn't being used. And I think he's going to find a way to get it done one way or another. So he's in that kind of mood, and I wanted you to be aware of that.
Okay.
So I don't know if he's going to call you directly. He might. And he's willing, I think he's thinking about getting somebody else to give him some advice. He doesn't want to do anything that's outside the box of what's legal or proper. If you want to feel more comfortable that you're not doing anything that's inappropriate or outside the frame of...
I'm 100% confident I'm doing nothing inappropriate.
Yeah. No, but would not be if you decided to use some of these tools under the law. Because I think he feels the government has to have done everything it can before we lose 9,000 jobs in a signature Canadian firm.
Right. So, I'm confident in where I'm at, and my views on SNC and the DPA haven't changed. This is a constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence that, Michael, I have to say, including this conversation, previous conversations that I've had with the Prime Minister and many other people around it, it's entirely inappropriate, and it is political interference.
That was part of a conversation Jody Wilson-Raybould had with the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, on December 19th, 2018. After the taped conversation was released on Friday, the Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying, quote, "The Prime Minister was not briefed by the clerk on his conversation with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and we were unaware of the full contents of this recording before today," unquote. Michael Wernick's lawyer also issued a statement later saying it was part of the clerk's job to manage relations between the Prime Minister and his cabinet ministers, and that after the recorded conversation happened, everyone went on holidays the next day. When everyone returned at the beginning of January, the first burning issue was the resignation of former Liberal MP Scott Bryson and a cabinet shuffle. The SNC issue never made it back to the top of the discussion list, and Wernick never discussed SNC again with the Prime Minister or the PMO until someone leaked the story to the Globe and Mail in early February. And just today, another major player in the controversy, former Prime Minister's top advisor and close friend Gerald Butts, sent a tweet saying, quote, "Having reviewed Ms. Wilson-Raybould's further testimony, I have tabled with the Justice Committee notes and texts between us related to the events Ms. Wilson-Raybould describes." So certainly there will be more reactions and twists and turns in the story. For more on this, we're now connected with CBC News' Hannah Thibodeau in Ottawa. She's been following the story's development closely. Hello, Hannah.
Hey, Duncan.
A secret recording. So everybody's asking, what compelled the former Attorney General to do that?
Well, she did explain, along with the recording that she submitted to the Justice Committee, she had documents that she submitted as well. And in those documents, she admits that it was extraordinary and otherwise inappropriate. So she admits it was inappropriate, but she adds that it was something she hasn't done before or since then. And she said she was concerned that the political interference she was feeling, the hounding she described in her testimony to the Justice Committee to support that plea deal for the Quebec engineering firm SNC-Lavalin, would continue in the phone conversation with Michael Wernick. So she said she wanted an accurate record. She was alone at the time. She didn't have someone to take notes, so she opted to record the 17-minute conversation.
It's been 2 days now since the audio came out. What are people in Ottawa saying about the fact that, I mean, the former Attorney General made that recording in the first place?
Well, the opposition are definitely making hay of this, and they want this story to stay alive. You can see in the polls, Duncan, that it's starting to hurt the Liberals if it hasn't begun hurting them way before this. And what the opposition are saying is that this taped conversation just reinforces their call to bring Wilson-Raybould back to testify for a second time at Justice Committee, because they say it backs those interference allegations. But also in the tape, the clerk of the Privy Council tells Wilson-Raybould of a potential collision with the Prime Minister over her decision not to offer that deferred prosecution agreement, or the DPA, to SNC-Lavalin. So they say by saying that there would be a collision is that veiled threat she was talking about in her earlier testimony back in February. But the opposition also say that the new submission by Jody Wilson-Raybould shows she raised concerns about political interference to the Prime Minister's office, to the top bureaucrat. And what they're saying is that contradicts what Wernick told the Justice Committee and testified to, but not only Wernick, also Gerald Butts, as you were talking about in the intro. That's the Prime Minister's former top advisor. And they said in their testimony that she never brought those concerns forward to her. So I'll be interested to see what Butts tables to the committee to see if there's any contradiction of that.
I wonder, a lot of our listeners are already tweeting us and Facebooking and saying, about the legality or the propriety of recording a private conversation, even if she was feeling pressure. What are people telling you, Hannah, about her role as the legal advisor to the government and the legal advisor to the Prime Minister at the time? Can she record that call?
Well, there's a lot of gray area in this. So in Canada, it's legal to record a conversation if one person or participant is aware of the recording. However, Wilson-Raybould really is kind of treading on a very tricky legal area because she is a lawyer. And because law societies have rules that bar lawyers from recording their conversations with a client or other lawyers unless the client or other lawyers say it's okay and give permission. And the reason for that is because they want clients and other lawyers to feel that they can speak freely and openly, have that open conversation. But Mr. Wernick is not a lawyer. So the question is, was Wernick asking for advice from her legal advice? Then it may apply. But if he was giving the Prime Minister's message to Jody Wilson-Raybould, then maybe it won't. However, then there are others who believe since she was the lawyer for the government, as you're asking, the rule applies for everything. And as you said, Michael Wernick's lawyer also responded. He said the recording was inappropriate. Other legal experts say it is a breach of Bar Society ethics rules. So really, it depends on where you fall in that definition.
It depends on the lawyer you ask as well. We've got an
I know.
We've got an employment lawyer later on in the show. She's going to walk us through some of it as well.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
You're in the thick of the politics, Hannah. MPs are returning to the Hill tomorrow on Monday. You've been reporting over the past couple of days that the pressure's building in the Liberal caucus to eject Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott from the caucus. They're still in caucus. So what's the chance of the former Minister of Justice staying after the release of this recording?
I think it's going to be very difficult for her to stay in the caucus, but also, as you mentioned, for Jane Philpott, because Jane Philpott, she also quit because of the SNC-Lavalin affair. I spoke with dozens of Liberal MPs. Most don't want to be named. Many who say they have lost the right, those two women, to be a part of the Liberal team. And the pressure is really building to eject them from caucus. Caucus meets on Wednesday. If this isn't on the official agenda, it is going to dominate it regardless from the people I was speaking with. And in fact, many say that after the secret recording was released, it simply confirmed what they thought already, that they don't want the two women in the caucus because most of who I spoke with don't trust them. So it will, I expect it to dominate the caucus meeting, which is always on Wednesday, if not earlier, because they can even bring it up earlier if they choose to do so. A large number simply want to expel them. But there are other senior Liberals, Duncan, who suggest while the caucus is inclined to kick them out, they feel that the better option would be for the two women to leave on their own accord. So we'll be watching for that too. And I do have to mention there are a few people who do still support the women and want to keep them in the Liberal fold. However, the majority of the dozens I spoke with want them out.
Hannah, you've always got your pulse on everything going on in the Hill. Thank you so much for sharing some of that today.
You're quite welcome, Duncan.
Hannah Thibodeau is a reporter in our Ottawa bureau. How do you feel about the secret recording? Do you think it was justifiable for Jody Wilson-Raybould to do so? Has it changed your mind on the SNC-Lavalin case? Share your thoughts with us. You're listening to Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio 1. I'm Duncan McCue. Call us at 1-888-416-8333, or you can email checkup@cbc.ca or join the conversation on social media. You can chat in real time on our Facebook live stream or share your thoughts on Twitter @CheckupCBC. We'll be reading your comments throughout today's show. The controversy over the SNC-Lavalin case has been a hot topic on this show since Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned from her cabinet position back in February. It's the fourth time in the past 6 weeks we've asked you to share your thoughts on this matter. It's hit home to a lot of you, particularly those who follow politics closely. That included Lori Turnbull, who's a political science professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax. She spoke to us on March 10th about the confidence crisis facing the Prime Minister. Here's an excerpt of what she had to say at that time.
it's clear to me anyway that of all of the characters and all of the actors involved in this, the Prime Minister has said the least. His message was essentially, there were political mistakes made here. There was a breakdown in communication. There was a breakdown in trust. We're going to learn from this and move on, which gives nobody any kind of new information or confirmation about what really happened. And so oftentimes in these situations, politicians will do something empirical, right? Like they'll say, we are going to change a law. We're going to change the rules to make sure this never happens again. And so then something like separating out the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice, like that type of a strategy becomes very... that kind of thing is common among politicians who are responding to an ethical crisis, is that they want to show themselves to be out front and proactive on it. But he's not doing that. He's kind of like, we're going to take this under advisement. We're going to take this as a teachable moment.
That was the voice of political science professor Laurie Turnbull in Halifax, speaking to us back in March. On Friday, right after the release of the tape of the secretly recorded phone call, we reached out to Professor Turnbull again. And she tells us that she was disappointed with the former Attorney General. Let's bring her in again now. Hello, Professor Turnbull.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. You feel disappointed with Jody Wilson-Raybould. Why?
Well, I think it's about the secret tape recording. Right? It's the relationship between the clerk of the Privy Council and members of the ministry is a very unique one that is based on trust. And so it's really hard to fathom a minister who tape records a conversation with a clerk on a matter before the government and does not make that recording clear to the clerk. It just strikes me as like, I mean, Mr. Wernick has made statements to the effect that he has decided to step away because he doesn't think that he would be able to enjoy a relationship of mutual trust with the opposition should they form government in the fall. Fair play. After this, I don't know how he would enjoy a relationship of trust with the current crowd either. I mean, yes, I realize that Ms. Wilson-Raybould to step away from cabinet, but still, this is a complete. This is absolutely not what you would expect from a minister.
Well, the secret recording, the reason she recorded it is because she felt pressured in the handling of the SNC-Lavalin. Why does it matter that she recorded it without Wernick's knowledge?
Why did she record him and not somebody else? Why not the Prime Minister? Why not any of the political staff she referred to? Why is it the clerk that she's decided to hang this at his doorstep? I just don't really understand that. And I mean, the clerk plays a very specific role as a secretary to the cabinet. And so when he is speaking to her about the minister, the Attorney General being at loggerheads with the Prime Minister about an issue, I mean, he is a secretary to the cabinet. He is the only person who is going to say, look, we've got an impasse here, and I need to sort it. And it's not about pressure. It's about, like, we need to bring this thing to a close because we can't have ministers on different sides of this. Like, generally, when there's a policy issue before the cabinet, and this is all out there, this is open, this is public information. The Prime Minister calls a consensus, and we don't know how that consensus is called, but he decides what the direction of government is, and everybody in the cabinet falls in line. In this case, this minister is saying, I have an issue with the Prime Minister's direction or choice of direction, and I'm not going to be on side. And so if the clerk's role here is to try to figure out how the government is going to go forward when the Attorney General, who has a particular, independent voice on this, and the Prime Minister are not on side, it's not that the clerk is trying to apply pressure. It's that he's trying to find a resolution because there can only be one voice coming from cabinet.
But let me walk you through this a little bit, though, Professor Turnbull, because, I mean, she mentions during the conversation several times that she felt uncomfortable having that conversation with the clerk of the Privy Council, that she felt it was political interference. And so if she's feeling that pressure, is this not a way for her to try to protect herself?
From what? With respect, why didn't she hang up? She participated in the conversation for 17 minutes and she recorded it. Like, I'm just at a loss in terms of her logic. Why didn't she hang up the phone? If you and I were having an inappropriate conversation, I'd hang up on you.
It is legal for her to do the recording. But aside from that, let me ask you this. I mean, what do you make of her strategic move to submit the tape to the Commons Justice Committee?
Well, I think that's probably a result of the fact that the government wasn't interested in having her back. right? Like she had gone to the committee, she had made her representation, Mr. Butts had gone afterward. And so if the committee wasn't going to have her back, then Mr. Butts had the final word. And so if the committee wasn't going to be able to invite her back because of the Liberal majority, I think several observers have pointed out, she has some options on the table. If she can't be invited back, she can submit documents, briefs, recordings, whatever she's got to the committee. So that's probably why she did, right, in the event that she's not invited back.
We played a clip from your chat with me a few weeks ago, and at the time you shared your thoughts with us on what Justin Trudeau could do to earn back the trust of Canadians. Do you think that this latest revelation is going to help, or is it going to hurt the Prime Minister?
It will hurt to the extent that it keeps the issue on the table. It will be neutral to the extent that there's not really a whole lot of new evidence brought to the table here. I mean, there are some things that you could parse a little more closely, but at the end of the day, there's no smoking gun here. There's nothing really factual that we've learned now that we didn't know before. And so it's a question of how long the issue can stay on the table. Now that we're going into a sitting week in Ottawa, it will help the opposition to be able to have this. And we also can see that Mr. Butts is bringing some more evidence forward as well. So I think it remains to be seen, what else we're going to find out about the story.
As a keen observer of politicians and the kind of the chess games that go on in politics, I wonder, can you just give me some insight on what you think the Jody Wilson-Raybould's kind of longer term play is here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question, right? And that's the one that's kind of on everybody's mind. And I don't think I have any insight here that anybody else doesn't. I don't know what she's gunning for. I don't know if she wants the Prime Minister's head. I don't know if she wants him to resign. I'm not really sure. And also the Philpott aspect is another dimension to that, right? Like, what if these two ministers have resigned from cabinet on principle? They are asserting principle, right? Like, and this is not we are leaving cabinet because we don't agree with the Prime Minister's approach to, taxes or the carbon tax or whatever it is. This isn't a policy issue. This is the two of them saying, I don't have confidence in this person, in the ethics of the government. And so if you're saying that, then that leads to the caucus question. I don't understand how these two can remain in cabinet when they've clearly, put a line in the sand between themselves and the Prime Minister and the people around him.
We've seen ministers and their prime ministers split in the past, whether it's Brian Mulroney and Joe Clark back in the day, or whether it was Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien. Does this have any of the hallmarks of that kind of political battle?
It's interesting. This particular one strikes me as this is a new kind of politics where you see the caucus around the Prime Minister saying, we don't really understand what these two are trying to do in light of the fact that we're all saying that we're Liberals, but these two are really striking out against the government. And I think in previous political iterations, this would never have happened, right? Like, you're either on side with the government, with a party, or you're not. And I think that Prime Minister Trudeau and the people around him tried to do politics different in a number of ways. They tried to be post-partisan. They with their approach to the Senate, with their approach to having supporters be involved in the selection of a leader. Like, they've really tried to do things different. And when that's creating like that, I mean, that's quite a different approach to what prime ministers have done before that. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it's working, because you see when something happens like this, the partisanship, which is also a principle, right? Like, I mean, it is a principle. It's sometimes rears its head in ugly ways too, but partisanship is a principle in and of itself. You see the partisanship still reinforcing itself, where the caucus is rallying around the Prime Minister and saying, listen, if these two don't want to be here, if they don't want to be team members, then get out.
Thanks for your analysis again on this, Laurie. I'm glad we could check back in with you.
Me too.
That was political scientist Laurie Turnbull at Dalhousie University. She spoke to us from Halifax. What about you? Are you feeling disappointed in the former Attorney General, or are you still rooting for her? Have your view on who's right, who's wrong in the SNC-Lavalin matter changed? Give us a call, 1-888-416-8333. Later in the show, I'm going to speak with an employment lawyer to see if it makes sense to make a secret recording if you feel pressured at work. You can stick around with us for that. Well, on the line now is Indigenous rights advocate Riley Yesno in Toronto. She's Anishinaabe from Ibamatong First Nation. She was also a member of the Prime Minister's Youth Council from 2017-2018. We also spoke with her last month on who she trusted more in the SNC-Lavalin affair, and at the time she said she believed Jody Wilson-Raybould, so we wanted to check back in. Hello, Riley.
Hi, Duncan.
Anine, we just heard from Professor Laurie Turnbull at Dalhousie that she was disappointed with the former Attorney General. How about you?
I guess the question, I can't speak to the legality of the call, obviously, as I'm not a lawyer, but I guess the big question is, do I think it was unethical or not? Although I can imagine that it probably had some profound impacts on Wernick and Jody Wilson-Raybould's personal life, and I understand where these claims of it being unethical come from, and I see that the merit of those claims, I'm personally not bothered by it.
Why not?
Because I think she is really in a position where she is it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If she hadn't recorded that and she didn't have such proof, people would call her and her testimony uncredible, unsubstantiated, and if she did record it, they'd call her unethical, like they are right now. And, she's a smart woman, and she knows in making that choice, she knew what her options were and the repercussions would be if she did or if she didn't. And she weighed those options and she chose what she thought was best. And I'm supportive of that choice. And because I think people, they are looking at this, and when they say it's unethical, they're thinking, of course, of themselves and how they would probably not like to be recorded without their knowledge, which I fully understand. But I think people seem to be less inclined to maybe think to put themselves in her shoes and look at that from that perspective and think about what kind of anxiety, pressure, overall mental burden and scenario you have to be in, knowing the repercussions. And like she said, she wasn't relishing in this at all, that she had to record it. What kind of mental burden you have to be going through in order to make that choice.
You mentioned the anxiety and the pressure. Is there anything when you listened or read the transcripts from the phone conversation that struck you, that you learned about the state of mind of Jody Wilson-Raybould that influenced your thoughts on this?
I think that what I found most striking in the call was how it illuminated these very much larger points, bigger than just SNC itself, talking about consent and power dynamics in the political world. I was just so struck about the number of times, because the call gave us really nothing new. She testified and said that all of these things, but listening to the tone and listening to the way that conversation played out and the things that they were saying to one another, I could just hearing her say several times that she said, I'm uncomfortable. This is inappropriate. I don't want to be having this call, and saying no in every way that you can pretty well be saying no. And still Wernick pressed on. And from what we gather from her testimony, that she had been saying no so clearly, and everyone still pressed on, and how different tactics were employed each time she said no to try and get her to change or respond, and how that speaks to a large conversation about consent, but then also bringing it back to power dynamics, the things that they leverage. They'll say, your boss isn't happy, the prime minister, how they weaponize jobs, and the prospect of job loss against people to try and change their decision. Bringing up the prime minister several times in this call, his state of mind, because he is a man who has more power and influence than she does. And it's a form of manipulation, bringing up those things, even though she's very clearly made up her mind and is, a very educated, strong, clear, articulate woman. And I think that she handled the whole thing really great. And of course, there is an argument to be made that of course she did, because she knew that this was her phone call and that she knew the situation and he didn't. But even in her testimony, even all this time, she's handled herself with a lot of grace. And I think about how common these sorts of conversations, these inappropriate conversations and pressuring conversations must be in the political world. And politics, how hierarchical it is, and how that often must play to the disadvantage of, younger folk, racialized folk, women, and especially in the political world, if it can happen to somebody like the Attorney General, which is one of the highest places, you can be in politics.
You said damned if she did, damned if she didn't. I wonder, what do you think the fact that she felt compelled to secretly record this phone conversation and then release it, what do you think it's going to do to her reputation?
I think we're seeing that play out right now. People, I think from the beginning of this, have kind of set themselves up in firmly entrenched camps. And maybe a couple of people will sway and say that they think that this is unethical, they don't like it, whatever. But it seems that people who are there will be people who rally behind her and stand behind her, and then there always will be people who won't. And that is, I think, also just the nature of politics, just magnified with this sort of scandal and the amount of media attention and coverage it's getting. So
the people, her people, the people of Weebekay First Nation celebrated her with an honor feast this weekend, and we're going to hear from a reporter on that later in the show that was there at the ceremony. So they're certainly rallying behind her. But now, of course, the chatter in Ottawa and political circles is whether or not Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott should stay in caucus. You're a keen political science student, Riley. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I've heard that chatter, and personally, I'm thinking about it first. I don't know if I were them that I would want to stay in that caucus. But
well, why?
Just because of how uncomfortable I think the whole thing was. How much I do believe that she was pressured, and how unethical it is, and the way that it's all been spun, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a very safe or working environment, a place that really is good for somebody's all aspects of their of their health and well-being. I just don't know that I would put myself in that place. But assuming that they aren't sick of politics and still want to be there and all of those things, I think that they should have the choice if they want to stay or if they don't want to stay. And if the Liberal government does kick them out of caucus, from a purely politics standpoint, I understand why they would do that. But I also think that speaks to the message that would send to me, at least, is that the government cares more about party than it does about country and than it does about community, because these two strong powerhouse women who were so revered in the roles that they did, especially in my experience, Minister Philpott, people really had a high amount of respect for her. And then, so for these two women to leave and very clearly state that there's a problem, instead of turning inward and trying to figure out where does that come from, what role do we play in this, can we improve our things, and instead to just boot these two women out, I don't think that sends a very good message at all.
Riley Miigwech.
Thank you so much.
That's Indigenous advocate Anishinaabe Kwe from Ibematong First Nation. Riley Yesno, she spoke to us from Toronto. What's your thought on the secret recording made by Jody Wilson-Raybould? Has this changed your mind about her or the SNC-Lavalin affair? Do you think her claim of political interference was substantiated through this? Give us a call, 1-888-416-8333, or you can send us an email, checkup@cbc.ca, or join our online conversation. That's what Lynn Parker did in Sherwood Park. She tweeted us, "Women tend to do politics differently than men. It's not backroom handshakes or wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Nope, won't fly. Not with Miss Wilson-Raybould. Love her gutsy style." Melanie Norman in Toronto tweeted us a different opinion. "My view is even more strengthened. Rightly or wrongly, I still trust Justin Trudeau. To me, secretly taping conversations smells of, quote, setup for other reasons. Who leaked this in the first place? Why? Jody Wilson-Raybould has stated nothing illegal done, yet she still keeps on disclosing in drops and drabs." Later on in the show, David Ball, the Star Vancouver's politics and democracy reporter, will join us. He was invited to the honoring celebration that was held near the Weebekay First Nation in BC, the home of Jody Wilson-Raybould. He got up close with the former Attorney General and had a chat with her. You don't want to miss that. Stick with us. Let's go over to the lines now. Louis Gerald is on the line from Cornwall, Ontario. Hi, Louis. Welcome to Cross Country Checkup.
Hello, Duncan. It's Louise.
Louise. Sorry, I lost. There was an E missing on my board here.
I know.
So what do you think of all this so far, Louise?
Well, a few weeks ago on the Radio Noon program here, they had the Case de Dépôt guy from Quebec talk about SNC. And it turns out that there's nobody in the current SNC that's, the bad guys from 10 years ago. So to lose all those jobs, and he also explained that several thousand of those jobs are in BC, several thousand are in Ontario. And I have no clue why anybody would be so anxious to cause trouble to a Canadian company. Haven't we got enough trouble with our, Chrysler Fiat shutting down, a shift and GM and this whole business you can't go taping people behind their back. I didn't see any pressure. When I listened, he just kept saying, well, we got to do something. I mean, that's pressure.
Well, the point she's making is it's political interference, right?
She set him up. She had the script set up. She knew what she was going to say. Oh, I feel like you're pressuring me. Well, she knew what she was going to say, and she knew she had the tape.
Louise, you may have just heard Riley Yesno, who talked about.
I also heard Professor Turnbull.
Well, I'm just wondering about what you think of Riley's point that when you are feeling pressure, when you need to feel the need to defend yourself, that it was a way of trying to protect yourself.
I'm a senior citizen, so I've been around a while, and I think I know pressure, and that didn't sound like pressure to me. If someone if I were working with someone and they said, we've got to find a solution, come on, we've got to find a solution. That's not pressure. That's like, we got to find a solution. I mean, it doesn't,
Did you find anything surprising, Louise, when you listened to the call?
Just that she taped it, that surprised me beyond belief. I could not believe anybody would do that to a fellow member of their party.
How do you think Jody Wilson-Raybould's going to wear this?
Well, I don't think she'll wear it well. It's called a party for a reason, eh? And I'm not a big supporter of that party. I vote as sort of in every party, whatever party suits me at the time. But I don't think you're supposed to do that when you're working together. I think you sit down and you hash it out. This wasn't like a threat to her life. This wasn't like. There are solutions, and it's a job situation for Canadians. And speaking of which, and I mentioned this to your producer, she was Attorney General when we decided to extradite the Huawei executive. And I heard Trudeau kept saying, we're a country of laws, we're a country of laws. Well, was he repeating what his Attorney General told him to say? Because now look at what we're suffering with regard to that.
Louise, I'm going to jump in. We've got lots of people that want to get on the line, but I really appreciate you.
Duncan, goodbye.
I appreciate you kicking us off, Louise. Naeem Rauf is calling from Edmonton. Hi, Naeem. Welcome to Checkup.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. What do you think of this secret phone call? The secret recording of the phone call.
Well, what do I think of the secret recording? I think that whatever the recording was, it's a pinprick compared to what Wernick, even Trudeau, and his chief of staff were up to.
Yeah. What is it that struck you about it?
About which?
About that. About what Mr. Wernick was suggesting to Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
He's interfering. I'm Canadian, but I was born in India, raised in India, and I had written an essay saying that I did not believe Jody, the Minister of Justice, because usually my father was Indian High Commissioner in Ottawa in the 50s, and I remember how blown away and how much admiration he had for the senior Mandarinates in Canada, their education, their ability, and most important, their probity. So Michael Wernick, I have the quotes from Andrew Coyne's thing saying, I think he is going to find a way to get it done one way or another. He is that kind of mood. And I want you to be aware that he is in a pretty firm frame of mind. That's interference with prosecutorial discretion. I was an assistant Crown Attorney in Ontario for 4 years. Nobody ever told me how to exercise my discretion. Even when, as a very junior assistant Crown, I would speak to my superior and say, what should I do with this? He said, well, this is what I would do, but it's your prosecution. You decide. I think it's a real subversion. You can't have the government telling the Director of Public Prosecutions whom to prosecute and whom not to prosecute. And I should tell you, I voted Liberal as a 10-year-old in grade 5 at my mock school election and voted Liberal, and I've voted Liberal ever since then. And I've been on boards of Liberal. But I think as a matter of ministerial responsibility, Trudeau should resign. And then Telford apparently saying, we don't want to debate legalities anymore. Well, that's shocking. That's absolutely shocking because we live in a country governed by the rule of law. It's in third world countries, and I say that advisedly since I'm from India, originally born and bred, and my father was in the Indian diplomatic service. It's in third world countries that the executive tells the director who to prosecute and who not to prosecute.
Can I read a tweet that we got from one of our listeners, because you're firmly you feel you're very concerned about the political interference that you heard in this call. Kelly Fay tweeted us this. Let me read it to you. I thought there was more to this story than first reported. This recording suggests that she's not the innocent victim she initially portrayed herself to be. I'm not sure why she's still in caucus, since it's clear she cannot be trusted to work with colleagues in good faith. What do you think of that thought?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I mean, part of the reason I didn't believe her initially was I thought, well, my experience and my father's opinion of clerks of the Privy Council was that, they had this high standard of probity and were superbly well educated. So I couldn't imagine Michael Wernick, with his education, not understanding the fundamental principle of non-interference. So if she recorded it, I haven't checked into the ins and outs and the legalities of it, whether the recording was right or not. But if she erred, her error was a pinprick in comparison to this wholesale destruction or attack on the rule of law. I should also point out that she's apparently getting counsel from a retired judge of the Supreme Court of Canada. I assume she would have checked this with him before she made it public, and he okayed it. So I don't know. His staff have probably researched it.
I don't know the answer to that either, Naeem, but I'm willing to guess that she probably did. And Naeem, I appreciate that you don't you mentioned not knowing the legalities. We've got Soma Ray Ellis, who's a lawyer, who's going to chat us through some of those. Thank you very much for your thoughts on this. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
On December 19th, 2018, Jody Wilson-Raybould called Michael Wernick from her condo in Vancouver and had a 17-minute long conversation about how she approached the criminal case involving the engineering giant SNC-Lavalin. It was clear in that conversation there was a huge gap of opinion between the former Attorney General and her boss, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, whose riding is Papineau is in Quebec, where SNC-Lavalin is based. The clerk of the Privy Council was trying to convince Wilson-Raybould repeatedly to, quote, use all the tools available to her in handling the case. At the end, the tone of the former Attorney General indicated she had some pretty grave concerns about where the conversation was going.
Well, I'm going to have to report back on before he leaves. He's been a pretty firm frame of mind about this, though, so I'm a bit worried.
Bit worried about what?
Well, it's not a good idea for the Prime Minister and his Attorney General to be at loggerheads.
Well, I feel that I'm giving him my best advice, and if he doesn't accept that advice, then it's his prerogative to do what he wants. But I am trying to protect the Prime Minister from political interference, or perceived or otherwise.
Well, I understand that, but he doesn't have the power to do what he wants. All the tools are in your hands. So.
Okay, so then, I'm having thoughts of the Saturday Night Massacre here, Michael. To be honest with you, and I don't. This is not a great place for me to be in. I don't relish being in this place.
That was part of a phone conversation Jody Wilson-Raybould had with the retiring clerk of the Privy Council on December 19th last year. What do you make of it? What would you do if you were Jody Wilson-Raybould? If you had a disagreement with your boss, would you do the same? Make a secret recording? Share your thoughts with us. Give us a call, 1-888-416-8333. And as I've mentioned a couple times now, employment lawyer Soma Ray Ellis will explain the law that's involved in a situation like this later in the show. Stick with us for that. Well, Bernie Matheson is on the line in Mississauga. Hi, Bernie. Welcome to Checkup.
Duncan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I give that woman a lot of credit. She took an awful amount of courage to stick to her principles and stand up against probably what is an old boys club that's been operating for 150 years. That when whatever the top man wants get done has to get done, whether it's legal or illegal. So I think what she did was very principled, and as far as the tape recording, I think it only solidifies what she said in her testimony. They didn't invite her back to the Justice Committee. They had Gerald Butts on, and they had Wernick on there trying to declassify what she said. And I think the tape only solidifies what she said, that there was pressure came from the top down, and Justin Trudeau had a little tantrum. He didn't get his way, and she just stood up against him. So I give her a lot of credit.
Let me ask you, how significant do you think this is going to be for voters when it comes to
I think
October?
what's going to happen, I think the last election, Justin Trudeau used a ruse. He picked the NDP to pieces. And he got that progressive vote, and I think what's going to happen now is that the progressive vote is going to swing back towards the NDP, and that the Liberals could be in danger of going down to third-party status again.
All right. Appreciate that thought, Bernie.
Okay, thank you.
Christina is on the line. Welcome to Checkup.
Yeah, I agree with your last caller. I feel like she's a highly principled person. I'm feeling much more supportive of her than I was initially when this whole story first broke.
Why?
Well, I remained pretty neutral initially because, the older I get and the more I vote and the more I follow politics, I realize that there's so much. It's all about strategy, and it always seems like there's something beyond just what's happening. There's a reason why things are happening. And so I feel like I always want to stay skeptical until I have more and more information. So as more information came to light, and then this recording came to light, I thought, okay, now I feel like you said in the very beginning when your show opened, it's not just he said, she said anymore. Now it really is. You're getting to actually hear the nuances of this conversation, which clearly were not the very first conversation these people ever had about this. Obviously, she was pushed to a point where she felt like she was justified in taking this drastic and inappropriate step in making this recording. And, I feel like she was justified because obviously it seems to me from this conversation and everything she testified about to the Justice Committee that she really was pressured, and it does smack of political interference. You can hear it in her voice. She's trying repeatedly to let Wernick know, like Riley was saying, to say no, to say I'm not comfortable with this, and he pushes and pushes. I don't think she was leading that conversation in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it sounds like you've listened to the conversation closely. So let me read you what Alan Rosen in Toronto had to say. He's watching on Facebook Live. He said this: by virtue of the undeclared recording, Jody Wilson-Raybould manipulated the conversation to be in her favor. I wonder what else may have been inappropriate. Nevertheless, the conversation does not truly achieve what she set out to achieve. What do you make of that?
Well, granted, for sure, because she knew that the conversations were being recorded and he didn't, there would be an opportunity there for her to, grossly manipulate that situation. But she made it clear that this was becoming very frustrating for her, and she'd made it clear in previous conversations that it was looking like it was political interference, and she didn't feel comfortable with it. She just kept reasserting the same thing that she'd been saying in previous conversations, and presumably to what her staff had been saying to PMO staff. So I don't see how she was manipulating that conversation in a gross and inappropriate way. I don't see it as that at all. I see a top-down pressure happening. It sounds like the PM is pressuring Wernick, and in turn then Wernick is pressuring her. And, you know, I'm listening to that conversation thinking, I've been in that situation before. Maybe not obviously to the state where the stakes were so high at this federal government level, but I've also been in that situation where I'm being repeatedly pressured by somebody who is more senior to me, who was older than me, and who is a man. So I can totally put myself in that situation.
Do you think that the gender here of the two participants in the conversation makes an issue in our analysis of it?
Who knows? I mean, I'm perceiving it perhaps because I'm a woman and I can see myself in that situation because I've been in that situation. I don't know. I know that there's that perception, though, potentially. And so I think we need to be sensitive to that.
Christina, you live in Jody Wilson-Raybould's riding of Vancouver Granville. I wonder, did you vote for her last time around?
I did not, but that's not to say that I haven't been supportive of the Liberals. I voted in a strategic way when that election came around. A whole lot of us were keen for the Conservatives not to get in, and so we took the lead of an organization called Lead Now, and they were saying that Mira Orek, who then was the NDP candidate in that election, that she would be the better choice, and in terms of voting strategically. It turned out not to be the case, but I was still thrilled when she got the seat and when the Liberals came to power. I'm a little bit disappointed. As time goes on, I'm becoming more disappointed with the Liberals, but yeah, I would still consider voting for her if she were to stand up again.
You'd consider voting for her. If she stays with the Liberals, you'd also be voting for the Liberals. Yeah. Does it make a difference to you if she stays a Liberal or not at this point?
Great question. I don't know. I mean, we still have a number of months before the election, and so anything could happen between now and then. Right?
It's a long time for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm going to still try and remain as open as possible to seeing things from all different sides and then make a determination closer to the election.
Christina, thank you so much for phoning from Vancouver Granville.
Thank you.
Catherine Carpenter is on the line from Calgary. Hi, Catherine. Welcome to Checkup.
Hi.
Hi. What do you think about this conversation between Michael Wernick and Jody Wilson-Raybould?
Well, first of all, I'm from Calgary, and my riding always goes Conservative. It's a very, very right-wing riding, and I voted everything. I voted Green. I voted NDP. I voted Liberal. I voted Conservative. Again, very strategic, but nothing ever changes here. So, but from my perspective, reading everything, watching as much as I can, and then listening to that recording, I am really shocked by her behavior.
What shocked you, Catherine?
Well, just even the fact that as I want to support women in business. I've worked for 34 years, and so I want all women to do well. And I'm surprised with how she has come about to this point where she's sharing emails and text messages and now a private secret recording of someone. It's really, really inappropriate that she did that. And if she had concerns, she should be going to the person that she is working with and the people above her. And if she had really serious concerns, she should have picked up the phone and talked to Trudeau on her own. And this whole idea of leaking information to the newspapers and then leaking more and then once again doing what she's doing with the
we don't want to suggest that Jody Wilson-Raybould is the one leaking this. I don't think that anybody knows at this point who the sources were for the Globe and Mail article which started all of this.
It may not have been her, but obviously it was somebody that she was sharing this information with. Is really surprising to me because, again, I'm going by my own perspective of working in a work environment. If I had an idea that someone was recording me or sharing my text messages or emails, I would be pretty upset. And because, sometimes we may not say exactly what we're supposed to say in a phone conversation. We may not text something that's actually the best wording or the way that we should say it. And I find it really really surprising that she would do such a thing, since she does have experience in the work environment, that she would do that.
The Prime Minister characterized this as an erosion of trust, as a breakdown between his people and the minister and her people. I wonder, what does this do for you, Catherine, in terms of just trust in politicians in general?
After listening to that recording and knowing that Wernick had no clue that she was recording him, and I listened to it twice to try to really grasp and understand it, that he had said, sorry, I called so late or something like that, and then he apologized, and he says, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. So what she had done is she didn't respond or answer. She set up her recording information, then she called him. And it's like her device to record. I'm not sure if she used a phone or what, but she waited, then she got ready, then she recorded him, and I thought, wow, this is really mean. And so my take on that erosion of trust now, it was all that Jody had an erosion of trust, but now I don't see it that way.
So you're saying it's mean, but let me just play devil's advocate with you for a second, Catherine. I mean, what about if it's mean, if as she's saying and throughout the phone conversation that she and her deputy are constantly getting interference from various officials in the PMO, from the the clerk of the Privy Council, that they need to do something. They need to find a solution.
I actually didn't consider it political interference.
Okay.
I actually considered it that it was their job, because this is a very important issue. I think it is their job to give their perspective. And I think she was not using, from what I'm gathering now, from all the stuff I've been reading, she actually wasn't doing what she was supposed to do, which was to use all the tools available. She was actually saying, no, I'm done. And I just thought, wow, you're using tools for other things. You're getting Supreme Court justices for other situations to guide you. When you have this tool here, why aren't you using it? Why aren't you saying, no, I'm done, when you did have an opportunity, even if it didn't change the whole outcome?
Can I ask you one last question, Catherine?
I'm just going to say, I think the erosion of trust is not the erosion of trust of her trust towards, I think, their trust towards her.
Yeah. Can I ask you one last question, Catherine? You began talking about the workplace environment, and I wonder, we're going to have a lawyer on in a couple seconds here to talk about the legality of this phone conversation. But in a workplace environment where an employee, and this is hypothetical, where an employee is feeling pressure or feeling that there is misconduct happening, do you feel that it's appropriate for them to try to record that in some way to use as evidence of some kind of misconduct?
Well, I wouldn't have done that, and I don't think it's appropriate. I would have gone to the person I was concerned with. I would have contacted them, and I have worked in a very large corporation setting where there's thousands of employees, and you have to go to people.
So you're just saying go straight to the boss?
You go straight to them, and you don't.
Even if you're worried about the boss being the source of the problem.
Well, I don't believe that he was the source of the problem. He has many other things to deal with, and that was actually the SNC case is so minor compared to all of the other things that are going on in the world. That's why he has ministers, and that's why he has all these other people doing their jobs.
Catherine, thank you. I'm gonna. Soma Ray Ellis, our lawyer, is on the line, so I'm gonna move on. But thank you for your opinion.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Having a difficult conversation with your colleague or your superior, I wonder, how would you handle that? On December 19th last year, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who's at the heart of the political interference controversy in Ottawa, she felt compelled to make a recording of a phone conversation she had with Michael Wernick. The then Attorney General dialed the number. Wernick picked it up. They had a 17-minute long conversation without him knowing that it was taped. It was a rather intense exchange, and the audio of the conversation, along with some of the 43 pages of documents, including related texts and emails, were submitted to the Commons Justice Committee on Friday. During the course of that telephone call, the former Minister of Justice said multiple times she was uncomfortable with the conversation.
Actually uncomfortable having this conversation, but I'm happy to talk to you.
Well,
I feel like I actually really feel uncomfortable having this conversation because it's wrong. anyway, I just, again, I'm surprised that you and I are having this conversation, but I'm just saying that I really feel uncomfortable and about the appropriateness of this conversation.
Okay, but I mean, you're not just the Attorney General, you're the Minister of Justice in the Cabinet, and but you have context within which you exercise your roles and responsibilities. Like I'm not seeing anything inappropriate here.
That was a portion of a phone conversation between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Michael Wernick. There were multiple times during the 17-minute conversation that the former Minister of Justice said she was, quote, uncomfortable. So let's turn to Soma Ray Ellis now. She's an employment lawyer in Toronto to get some analysis on this. Hello, Soma.
Hello, Duncan. How are you?
I'm doing well. You've listened to the full 17-minute recording. What stood out?
I have.
What stood out to you about it?
Well, there's been a lot of discussions over the weekend regarding, is it legal for someone to tape a conversation in the context of a workplace? And then you have to combine that with regulatory requirements of lawyers. So I think what's important is to understand, is it legal in Canada to tape a conversation with your coworker?
I hope you can answer that question for us.
I can. What we need to understand is that the Criminal Code of Canada says that there are protections for invasion of privacy, and it's illegal to willfully intercept a private conversation. Intercept includes listening to a recording or acquiring communication. So the general law is you can't be intercepting, recording a conversation. But then the law goes on to say that we are a single-party consent jurisdiction. What that means in practical terms is if the person that's recording the conversation with another person, an employee with another employee, a coworker, a boss, consents, him or herself, then they can go ahead and record the conversation.
So as long as one of the parties in the call consents, is that right?
That's right. There are other exemptions for that. So if you are management, you can't tape the employee without their consent. If you are a lawyer, you can't tape a conversation with your client or another lawyer. So what stands out in this case and what the discussions amongst lawyers over the weekend has been is that was she in the act of providing legal advice to Mr. Wernick? He's not a lawyer. So that's a non-issue. So that's just the half of the obligation. Was she doing so in terms of providing legal advice? So that stands out. But, I know that people think it's an extraordinary thing, and it is an extraordinary thing to tape a conversation with a colleague. But I have to tell you, it's becoming not that uncommon. In the age of mass media or internet justice, where a mere allegation can be a death knell to somebody's career, employees, management, everybody's asking, how do I prove my case? How do I prove my truth? So in cases where there is overwhelming pressure, where there is a systemic weight of the system in terms of against you, cases of harassment, bullying, discrimination, we are beginning to see more and more where people come to our offices. They come to me in my practice of employment law and say, I have a tape recording. It's, and your last caller said it was mean. And, there is that level of ethical questioning. It is mean anytime anybody's recording somebody without telling them. But people are feeling, in many instances, bullied, scared, worried about consequences. How and the question being, how do I prove my truth?
So we've got a caller on the line I want to bring into this conversation because she's got a story that she wants to illustrate this very thing that you're talking about. So do you mind if I bring her in?
Sure.
Okay, and she wants to stay anonymous because she's concerned about losing her job. So we'll just call her Jane. She's from near Toronto in Ontario. Hi, Jane. Welcome to Checkup.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. You've got some thoughts about recordings based on your personal experience.
This is all I've been talking about all weekend.
Sure.
You know what I find interesting? Your last two guests have really resonated with me. Just talking about the taping, it is legal for sure, but there's a power imbalance. So you have Jody Wilson-Raybould, who's really intelligent, who's very well spoken. But when I listened to the tape, I could hear her flipping pages. So she was really well prepared for that phone conversation. And it becomes a power imbalance where she sounded really like she knew exactly what she was talking about, which she did. She was for sure feeling pressured, but when you have somebody that's taping another without their knowledge, there's a power imbalance, and for me, it's an ethical issue, and it's professionalism.
Let me ask you, you work in the health profession, and you've had experience with this kind of recording before. Can you tell us that story?
Well, just that there was some recording going on of multiple people, and when it came out, the general feeling was shock, and wow, we're being taped here, and what was being taped, when was it being taped, why was it being taped, and why can't we just sit and have a conversation? And it really puts everybody in a different frame of mind when they're being taped. And it becomes a lack of trust.
And so how did that end up impacting the work environment you were in?
Well, just everybody was kind of mouths ajar going, what the heck? And everybody has to take a step back and go, did I say something I shouldn't have said? Or what's going to happen next in this situation? So in her situation, for sure she's, for me, I'm in the middle. But, it kind of, for me, I'm thinking, why did she do this? It's almost career suicide.
All right, Jane, thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Soma Ray Ellis. What do you make of? I mean, what Jane was talking about there is how when it comes out that these kinds of recordings are being made, whether someone is trying to protect themselves or not, that it just completely shatters a workplace environment and the trust there. What do you think of that?
Well, of course. I think, if we just think of ourselves and think about situations where we think we're just having a frank conversation, and if you've been taped, of course, you would feel violated. It's important to understand that management can't tape employees. And if companies want to be taping employees, they have to tell them. They have to get their consent by way of policies and or contracts that advises them and that they may be taping, recording their employees. In terms of coworkers, there's, in Ontario, the Ontario Court of Appeal has told us back in 2012 that there's such a thing as a privacy protection right, and it's called intrusion upon seclusion. What that means is you have a right to seclusion or privacy and protection from that intrusion with respect to common law rights. And what that means is if your coworkers are reviewing your personal information, taping things inappropriately, even though we're in a single consent jurisdiction, you may be able to sue them. And in the case back in 2012, what happened is two bank employees were involved. One was going through the financial information of another employee. The employee was both a customer of the Bank of Montreal and an employee, and had been doing it for a number of times over a 4-year period because, and it may be coincident that the employee who was being snooped on was now dating this employee's ex-spouse. And the court said, you know what, she had a right to privacy. The coworker did not have the right to snoop and to intercept private information. So it's just because the criminal code says it's a single consent jurisdiction and you're part of a conversation and you're taping it doesn't mean you can't find yourself in the middle of a lawsuit, because it depends on what you're taping, what you're doing with it, and the context. So there are
so let me ask you about the context
here.
Let me ask you about the context here again, being really specific. I mean, Jody Wilson-Raybould, at the time, as the former Attorney General, was the government's top lawyer. You seem pretty clear that it wasn't illegal what she was doing. From a professional ethical standpoint, did she cross any ethical lines as a lawyer in terms of her taping the conversation?
The opinions divided, from what I can tell, and I've had numerous conversations in the following way. She wears many hats, right? She's the Attorney General, the Justice Minister, Cabinet Minister. So the question is, was it a discussion between colleagues that she taped, or was she giving legal advice? And from what I can tell, the opinion is weighed in her favor, that it was not a discussion where Mr. Wernick was seeking legal advice from her, but rather sending her a message about what needed to be done, in his opinion, with respect to the deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin, that it was really a message-sending conversation that was taped as opposed to somebody coming to her looking for legal advice. The other side, the divided opinion, from what I can tell, more so of a minority, and I could be wrong. The poll, it's an informal poll from my discussions with my
You're a lawyer, not a pollster.
Yeah, no, I'm not a pollster. So, you do a poll and I may be completely wrong, but from the discussions I've had with my colleagues, the other side, of course, being that every discussion you have as the Attorney General is giving legal advice when you're dealing with the Government of Canada and somebody coming to you as the Attorney General. So it's a difficult question.
Well, and I can see that there are lots of lawyers out there that are debating, and you get a couple lawyers in a room, and you're going to get different opinions always. But let me ask you one last question, because I'm struck by something that you were talking about earlier, about this coming up more and more in the context of the Me Too movement, bullying and harassment in the workplace, and that you are seeing it more and more common that people are trying to record, whether it's conversations or behavior somehow, in their workplace. What's the primary advice you'd give a client who came to you and brought you this kind of secret recording?
Well, first of all, I would ask the purpose of the recording and the context of the recording, and then I would ask for the copy, because keeping evidence untainted is really important if you're going to use it in the court. But usually what happens is clients will ask us before they tape. They will ask, is it okay to tape? And it would be an extraordinary...
They'd ask before.
Some do. And actually many are asking now before. And ironically, often now management is asking before they get into a room in a performance management situation, because they're afraid that they're going to be accused of harassment. So there's a lot of things going on with respect to the use of tape recordings right now in employment situations. So if you're management, you have to get the consent. If you are the employer, you have to get the employee's consent before you make a recording of a workplace conversation. If you're an employee, there are circumstances where somebody's being horribly bullied, they're being harassed, and it's discussions only. So how do you prove it? And so if you can't prove it in any other way, and you're afraid for your job or you're afraid for your health and safety, then those are appropriate places where you could record a conversation from a manager. So it depends on the context. And this is an issue that I think we're going to see
and you might
develop further.
And you might want to consult your counsel before you did that, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Soma Ray Ellis, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Soma Ray Ellis is an employment lawyer in Toronto. Later in the show, we're going to be speaking with David Ball, who is the politics and democracy reporter in Vancouver with the Toronto Star. He's spoken to Jody Wilson-Raybould after the audio recording was released. He talked with her yesterday at a big ceremony that was being held by her home First Nation honoring Jody Wilson-Raybould. You don't want to miss that. Stick with us. Well, Rich Ranson is on the line from Kemptville, Nova Scotia. Hi, Rich. Welcome to Checkup.
Oh, hey, Duncan. How's it going?
Going well. What do you think of the conversation?
Well, I think it's fantastic that you guys are keeping on top of this. And I'd like to say once again that the CBC may be the last check and balance now in this land. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
The truth has to get out there.
So whose side are you on?
Well, I'll be quite honest and frank with you from the very beginning, and I watched the Honorable Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould's entire testimony. I think it was about 4 hours or something. I watched it twice now. But from the onset, I was 100% convinced, and I'll tell you why. No one goes up against this kind of power. This is a David and Goliath situation. There's no way that Wilson-Raybould wanted to end up in this sort of unusual situation. Never would have happened. And no one goes up against power like that unless there's a reason, and it's principled. I believe everything she said, and now that I've heard the 17 minutes of conversation, that only bolsters the entire argument, and it states and shows clearly that back maybe even before September that there was pressure.
Can I read you an email that we got from Ken Hodgins? He said this, Miss Wilson-Raybould represents herself and is celebrated by her community and many others as a truth teller. I struggle to reconcile that characterization with this seeming failure to tell the truth at the time about secretly recording conversations. Seems she may have seriously damaged any claim to integrity. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think that this is a devil's advocate situation, and I see it this way. I respectfully, completely disagree with this person. Now, it's documented. It's in the news. They were throwing her under the bus. The smear campaign was on long before this conversation ever came out. And this is in the newspaper. It's not up for argument. It's not up for discussion. The smear campaign was on. And I don't see her doing this action as retaliation. I just see her clearing her name simply because they were damaging her reputation. And reputations are important things. Therefore, she has simply protected herself. And you know what? Let's face it, the reference in the conversation to Saturday Night Massacre should have, the red alert should have been on for Mr. Wernick, who certainly would have known that reference. So I don't think that Michael Wernick didn't know about this conversation. He knew a long time ago, and I'll tell you why I think so. In his testimony, which I watched very carefully, he said he did not wear a wire or he did not record the conversation. As such, that means he knew. Therefore, this conversation never had to come out, and it only came out to protect herself. Therefore, think, and there's one last thing I'd like to quickly add. Think about where the buck would have stopped if a criminal investigation was ever launched, let's say. The Attorney General, the buck's going to stop there. So she protected herself because she could have perhaps been seen later to have been complicit in unusual activities. And SNC-Lavalin is, companies engage in all kinds of unusual activities due to globalization, and it's going to be more and more so increasingly. So their track record speaks for itself. I see the AG here, the Honourable Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould, and Honourable Minister Phil Pott, and the other person who made the same statement, Chavez or Cesar, I can't remember her name. This is a pattern.
Dan, so let me ask you one last question, Rich, and real brief. I just wonder, when you mentioned those three liberal MPs and the stand that they're taking, where do you see this headed from their perspective? What do you think they're trying to accomplish?
Well, I don't think there was any grand master plan here. This thing went sideways, and when things go sideways, well, we see all kinds of unusual activity. And I think that what we've seen, the response from the PMO, the crisis communication, I mean, it's failure after failure after failure. These people are just simply telling the truth. And anyone out there in the land, this is the last thing I have to say, has to recognize the power structure imbalance in this situation. We have three women here, okay, and I'm a guy, so maybe I shouldn't be speaking to this, but we have three women going up against the alpha male of the alpha males. They're just telling the truth here, and that's all. And unfortunately, well, you know what they say about the truth, and that's a very funny way of getting out.
Rich, thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
Bye.
We're going to go from Kemptville, Nova Scotia, over to Oceanside, BC, where Joan Sampson is. Hi, Joan. Welcome to Checkup.
Hi.
I wonder, our question today is, has Jody Wilson-Raybould's secret recording changed your mind about the SNC-Lavalin affair? Where do you fall on this?
I am still a firm supporter of Jody Wilson-Raybould in this whole matter, and my concern is that the corruption of our justice system is far too important to Canada to turn this into a should she have recorded the phone call or not. She had been facing all kinds of pressure for months, and she had personally told Justin Trudeau that what her decision was, and then she was called by Wernick yet again. So I see this as quite prudent on her part to have done what she did. But the issue that I really want to bring up is that this whole issue is the PM is still being evasive. He's not come clean. On the weekend, his former advisor, Gerald Butts, it was reported in the Globe and Mail that he lied to Jody Wilson-Raybould, Butts did, claiming that there was a precedent for the PM overriding the Attorney General, that Mulroney had ordered Kim Campbell to make a certain prosecutorial decision. And Kim Campbell said, no, that was not true. So we have all kinds of evidence of this massive corruption and interference by the political party, by the Prime Minister, in the Canadian justice system. And
so I'm going to stop you there. I mean, massive corruption, perhaps getting stretching things a little bit, and also it's a good article. Okay, when you're talking about SNC-Lavalin, sorry, I thought you were talking about the
correct. Yes, SNC-Lavalin, and the concern is that Jody Wilson-Raybould
alleged massive corruption
appears to be being made into some sort of a scapegoat and discredited.
Yes,
and that's concerning to me. We have a situation in BC that's very similar.
You said that you're worried that Justin Trudeau is being evasive here. I understand you voted for the Liberals in the last election. How has this impacted your vote when it comes to October?
Yes, I usually I vote for the best candidate in my riding, and I was very encouraged by the Liberals, thrilled even. But his handling of this matter and others, this is not the first instance where he has strong-armed somebody. And actually, now that I think about it, there was that issue shortly after he came into power where he physically strong-armed somebody, I guess. So
he was certainly boisterous on the floor of the House. Yes, let's put it that way.
Yes, whatever. It just popped into my head, so I apologize if I didn't describe it properly. Mm-hmm. But this is very concerning to me. The corruption of our justice system, it's so important that we make sure that there is no political interference in the prosecutorial decisions of our legal system, because if we look the other way and allow this to happen, it will spread far, wide, and deep to the point that you or I could be touched if somebody else decides to lean on the prosecutors and get a favorable deal from somebody because they're pals of somebody in power.
Joan, thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing it back to SNC-Lavalin, because there are lots of people that are worried that we get lost in the political conversation here and forget that this is about corporate corruption. So thank you very much. I appreciate that call.
All right, thanks.
Glenn Francie in Calgary is watching on Facebook Live and said, brought us back to this conversation again. I'm still in favor of the deferred prosecution agreement option. Secretly recording private conversations, knowing that you may one day go public with it, gives that person a very unfair advantage to portray the situation more favorably towards their argument. Janice Brown in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, is also watching on Facebook Live. She wanted to respond to Professor Turnbull's comments. Why did JWR stay on the phone? Because she was trying, obviously unsuccessfully, to explain the legal issues to Mr. Wernick in a way he'd understand, in hopes he'd influence the PM's perspective. Doug Willens is on the line from Calgary. Hi, Doug. Welcome to Checkup.
Thanks.
What are your thoughts on this so far?
I totally understand where Jody Wilson-Raybould is coming from. I've been in the situation where once in my life I have recorded a phone conversation, and it was with my superior, and I knew that my job was on the line in that conversation. And I recorded it because I also knew that nobody was going to believe what I was saying or how he was responding unless I had some kind of evidence of it.
Yeah, so a pretty dramatic step to decide to record it. What ended up happening?
It worked. It was an ethical issue, and I had polled other members of the staff and talked to them ahead of time and said, how strongly do you feel about this? And they were all behind me that we believed the CEO was not acting in an ethical manner. And so on the conversation and on the tape, I let the rest of the staff hear it, and the CEO was very pushy and bullying me to the point of saying, nobody's gonna believe you. Who are you to be saying this to me? And towards the end of the conversation, I said, I want you to know I have recorded this, and I will be playing it for the staff. And all of a sudden, his tone changed, and it became much more conciliatory, and he realized that I was representing all of the staff, and he had threatened to fire all of us if we, or I said we're acting together in unison in this, and that we will actually quit if you proceed to act in this manner. And that's when things changed around. And in the end, he did do the right thing. And this was quite a few years ago, and it is now, water under the bridge. I've seen him since, and we've chatted about it, and there's no hard feelings. But that's what it took to stand up to somebody at that time that was really pushing hard to do something we knew was unethical.
What did your colleagues, what kind of response did they have when you played that recording for them and when you told them that you had taped the conversation?
I think we were all really just feeling really sick about it because, as I can imagine, Jody Wilson-Raybould didn't want to be in that position either. I didn't want to be confronting my CEO. He hired me. I did respect the man, up till that point, and there were lots of other great things that he did. So I was like, and we all knew that this was serious because we knew that, it could push us to the point of being unemployed, which that's not a small matter if you're the sole breadwinner, which I was at that point.
As someone that was in Jody Wilson-Raybould's shoes, then you've heard the comments on the show today, Doug. The person that is recording the phone call surreptitiously has a bit of control here because they know that it's being recorded, right? How did you feel about that and being able to perhaps or potentially shape the conversation, given that you know that it could end up being evidence of some kind?
I didn't have to really say a lot because the pushiness and the I can do what I want attitude came through without me doing a whole lot of prodding. I just had to say one or two things about not agreeing with his actions, and he went on a spiel about it. So it really, I didn't have to do a lot of shaping to point out.
Bottom line, the bullying stopped for you in your workplace.
It did. Yeah, it did. And it certainly took a massive amount of effort on everybody to support me to do that too. And I never want to do it again. I think I probably didn't stop shaking for several hours after that conversation. So,
Doug, that's a really interesting experience you had. I thank you for sharing it.
All right. Thank you.
The audio released on Friday, which captured that conversation between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Michael Wernick, confirmed that there was a really stark difference between the former Attorney General and the Prime Minister on how SNC-Lavalin and the criminal case should be handled, what constitutes political interference. So again, if you haven't heard it, let's listen into part of that conversation.
His view is he's not asking you to do anything appropriate or to interfere. He's asking you to use all of the tools that you lawfully have at your disposal.
I know I have a tool under the Prosecution Act that I can use. I do not believe it is appropriate to use it in this case.
Okay. All right. I mean, then that's clear. He's in a very firm mood about this. So,
does he understand the gravity of what this potentially could mean? This is not just about saving jobs. This is about interfering with one of our fundamental institutions. This is like breaching a constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence. So we can. I
don't think he sees it as that.
Well, then nobody's explaining that to him, Michael. Like this is we can stand up in the House of Commons and on Norman, on totally appropriately on Norman, on extradition, and we can talk about the rule of law. The cases aren't dissimilar. The principle or the integrity of how we act and respond to the tools that we have available and what we should and shouldn't do. I don't know.
That was a portion of the 17-minute phone call Jody Wilson-Raybould had with Michael Wernick on December 19th, 2018. Paul Sacco is watching the show on YouTube. He says, I believe Raybould, she caught the PM red-handed. It makes me wonder if they appointed her partially because they thought that a rookie minister would be a pushover on SNC. Boy, did they get a surprise. Jenny Wright in Lansdowne, Ontario sent this email. Yes, the secret recording has changed my mind. To say that I'm shocked is an understatement. Up to this point, I was with her. But for any graduate of a Canadian law school, for a member of any bar association, even an honorary member, this is unthinkable. Let's go back to the lines. George Tabus is from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Hi, George.
Hi there.
You're a long-time card-holding member of the Liberal Party, is that right?
That's correct.
So what do you think about the conversation and the portions of it that we've been playing?
Well, I think that I fully appreciate the ethical and legal questions around the recording of the phone call. However, I think that has gotten us off track here. It's gotten us a little bit into the realm of soap opera and gotten us away from the main issue, which is what is supposed to happen or will happen to SNC-Lavalin. My thinking on the matter is that all politicians fall somewhere on the realpolitik spectrum, and clearly the Prime Minister and the former Attorney General fall at different points. They are both principled. They both have their points of view. I'm rather in favor of a strong, pragmatic government, and I think that's what the Prime Minister was trying to establish in this case with his stand. And
well, pragmatic. I mean, he says repeatedly.
The tape we just heard. I mean, you have to remember that a DPA is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for SNC-Lavalin. It's a legal penalty.
Okay, but let me say this. I mean, Jody Wilson-Raybould repeatedly says in the conversation, and apparently in conversations her staff had with the PMO, that the Prime Minister should be warned about the potential danger of political interference.
That's correct.
So you're saying that you think that the Prime Minister was being pragmatic. Do you think that the Prime Minister overstepped?
I don't think he overstepped. I mean, we have to remember that, as far as I understand, the present situation is that the SNC-Lavalin is going to be prosecuted. That's the present situation. What will happen in the future, of course, I can't predict. I mean, I think he was expressing his point of view forcefully. No question about that.
Well, and he kept saying he wanted a solution to it.
Pardon?
He kept saying, according to Jody Wilson-Raybould, that he wanted a solution to it.
That's correct. And I suppose he wanted his solution, and I think that's the point of view the Prime Minister should be advocating. I mean, I think he understands what her point of view is, but I mean, the government has to govern the whole country. It has to look after jobs, true, not just in Quebec, but in Alberta and now BC and everywhere. And it's the government's job to govern the entire country. And I think that was the Prime Minister's perspective there.
Earlier on in the program, we were talking with our political reporter, Hannah Thibodeau, and she said that the Prime Minister, as much as he's been trying to turn the page on this, has been taking a hit in the polls, at least, with regard to some of the supporters that he has right across the country. As a card-holding member of the Liberals, how confident are you in your team's chances when it comes to the re-election efforts?
Well, I will certainly still. My view is I would still vote for the Liberals because I believe in the principles the Liberal Party stands for. Certainly, the Prime Minister has taken a hit in the polls recently. I'm not overly concerned about that at the moment because I think that the Prime Minister is an excellent campaigner and certainly a much better campaigner than the leaders of the two main opposition parties, and I think once the campaign starts, I would think one would see the Prime Minister's ratings go up quite substantially.
George, thanks for your thoughts from Winnipeg.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, the ripple effect of the phone conversation has yet to fully dissipate. Jody Wilson-Raybould spent a day yesterday in her home territory on Vancouver Island, where she was being honored by members of her Kwakwaka'wakw family and community. Saturday's event was to celebrate Puglas, Wilson-Raybould's Kwakwala name that roughly translates to a woman born to noble people. Roughly 500 people came out and attended the feast in Campbell River, BC. One of them was Shelley Joseph. CBC News reporter Chantel Bell-Richard spoke to her.
You know, bigger than the actual work she's done for Canada, she has become a symbol for all little Indigenous girls even, and as to what you can achieve.
That was Shelley Joseph, a supporter of Jody Wilson-Raybould, speaking to CBC News in Campbell River, BC. The feast in Campbell River was held in a big house, a traditional wood frame building amongst the Kwakwaka'wakw people. It was a private event. My next guest was the only reporter who got invited into the ceremony and feast. David Ball is the Star's politics and democracy reporter in Vancouver, and he joins us now from Nanaimo, BC. Hi.
Hi, Duncan. Thanks for having me on.
You were at the Big House yesterday to see the honoring feast for Jody Wilson-Raybould, and you got a chance to talk with her. What was her spirit like?
Well, I was there just after your reporter Chantel had left, but had a great chance to talk to some of the community. So as Chantel wrote, it was 500, maybe even 600 people there. They've been cooking for 4 days, and it was actually a pretty happy mood. People were laughing. Jody had a lineup about 45 minutes long of people wanting to hug her, talk to her about either their childhoods together or if they came from farther away, like the interior, just how much she'd inspired them. And that was kind of the energy was she seemed kind of humbled. At one point, she even cried because two chiefs put dried sea otter pelts over her shoulders. And she actually was crying at that point, but it wasn't really sadness. It definitely seemed like she was humbled.
Jody Wilson-Raybould has made it very clear that she has connected to her community throughout this, throughout her testimony. She talked about being from a long line of matriarchs. I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about what the feast was for and the tradition of the Big House that it was held in?
Sure. Well, I'm just learning about the Big House ever since this whole scandal kind of erupted. I noticed that she did talk about that line of matriarchs in her Justice Committee testimony. So basically, her First Nation is Webekai First Nation. So they threw this honoring feast for her and spent 4 days cooking salmon and roast beef and all kinds of salads and stuff. But the larger nation of which those sort of bands are part of is the Kwakwaka'wakw or Kwakiutl Nation. That includes many areas of sort of northeastern Vancouver Island and some of the Kingcome Inlet area. The Big House in that tradition, as it is in many Northwest Coast traditions, as you probably know, Duncan, is one in which the Big House is the sort of governance and cultural and economic heart of that culture traditionally and still today. But it was a place that people held potlatches, where they would do economic exchange, and it was sort of the center. Nowadays, after decades of it being illegal to hold those ceremonies under Canadian law until 1951, there was a resurgence, mostly thanks to people like Jody's own grandmother, Effrey Pearson, who kind of did them underground and illegally. So she kind of comes from that. It's not just a statement or a saying. It's bigger than her own band. It's the whole Kwakiutl Nation as a whole.
And for anybody who's ever been to a potlatch in BC, then you know that there were many, many speeches, I'm sure, there at the event. And so I wonder, what were people saying in terms of, I mean, you suggested that they were giving her a sea otter pelt to wear. What were people saying about her role in government and as a Liberal MP?
So, well, from what I've heard from a lot of elders, both in Webekai Nation, they have an elders council that kind of broke down the Big House a couple of weeks ago for me. Also, Chief Bobby Joseph with Reconciliation Canada has been going to them since he was a kid. This was the shortest one I've ever heard of. It was 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. they can go on for 16 or even 2 or 3 days. So this was a kind of abbreviated version. What people were saying, it's essentially it's a series of dances and storytelling that kind of goes back to the origin stories of the Kwakiutl people, and then kind of tells moments of their history and how each of the house clans and hereditary chiefs came to be, that kind of thing. So basically, they showered her in eagle down feathers. They gifted her with these otter pelts, and then one by one, chiefs got up and paid respect. Only a couple actually referenced the political situation that she's sparked here with SNC-Lavalin. Many of them just simply talked about the sort of goodness and truth within the tradition, spoke kind of generally about the sort of the sense of values and morals in the history. So it wasn't, I would say, a partisan event in any stretch, or even one that was overt. You wouldn't have got many headlines out of the speeches, to be honest. It was just a lot of people kind of expressing traditional respect for her.
You said that she got emotional as she was being honored in this way. You got a chance to talk with her. What did she talk about when she talked with you?
Sure. Well, I got the honor of sitting at the head table, which is unusual, but I've been getting to know her sister a bit, hoping for an interview that we've all been trying for in the media, and also just to kind of figure out what's driving her, what's the end game for her, right? So I agreed not to ask any hard questions until the dinner and feast were over and all the speeches. And so at the very end, with the eagle down still in her hair, we just talked about where she gets her strength from, if she has any regrets, because there's all these concerns about her secretly taping the call, about the damage this is doing to her party ahead of the election, all this stuff, right? And she had no regrets. She said that, the most important thing has always been to ask yourself, what is the truth that she needs to tell? And she said, if I don't tell the truth, because the Kwakiutl are an oral culture, if you don't speak the truth, then your culture dies. That's what she said to me. So I found that very interesting. She definitely says that she's still telling the truth about this. And she also said that the ceremony has kind of emboldened her to go back to Ottawa with that sense again of support and her culture for whatever's next in this SNC-Lavalin affair.
You mentioned that some of the chiefs were talking about goodness and truth. Did anyone at all talk about the phone recording? I mean, we've heard from some of our callers on the show today that they're a little concerned that it was done in secret and wondering if that's a truthful act in and of itself. Did anyone talk about it at all with you?
Yeah, a few people did. Jody didn't, but a few of her the fellow chiefs and sort of supporters, I don't think would be a surprise to say that they many of them had a mistrust in the Canadian government institutions based on their history. So the few that I asked about it who wanted to talk said that they weren't surprised that she would do that they would have done it too, because even if it was something that seemed unusual or even unethical, the larger truth of the situation was that she would be railroaded and that people would try to smear her or question her. So I would say that that people were sympathetic, but I don't think that was surprising. To me, it was more a question of people weren't so concerned about the ins and outs of this particular scandal, but more about their community member and family member standing up for kind of what they believe in, which is kind of as an ambassador of Indigenous cultures more broadly. A lot of different cultures were there who said they felt proud as Indigenous people that she was kind of bringing this outsider perspective to Ottawa on a situation that probably would have just been handled the way Trudeau wanted under any other government.
David, I'm glad that you could share the event with us, and I hope there's always lots of food to eat after a big house feast. So I hope you're getting to rest and maybe get some exercise.
I'm still full.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was David Ball, who is a politics and democracy reporter at the Vancouver Bureau with the Star. He's spoken to us from Nanaimo, BC. Well, Ronnie Lowry is on the line. Hi, Ronnie. Hi. Welcome to Checkup.
Thank you very much.
What are your thoughts on this conversation between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Michael Wernick?
Well, I'm having difficulty hearing, but I'm going to do my best. I am absolutely appalled by her behaviour. I have absolutely no sympathy for it whatsoever. And I think for her to say she was speaking her truth, I think if she had said she was giving her own perspective or opinion, it might have been a more real viewpoint of the thing. And I think for her, a woman, a person, not a woman, just a politician in her position, in that standing, to surreptitiously and secretly tape the Privy Council, I think it was just disgraceful.
We've heard, you mentioned that she was a woman. We've heard some women say that they could completely understand that being in a situation where you're feeling pressure is an uncomfortable place to be. Is that something that doesn't hold water for you?
I suspect that Jody Wilson-Raybould might be fairly immune to pressure. You know, you could maybe spin that on its axis and say that the Prime Minister and Michael Wernick were also under pressure, because I didn't see Jody Wilson-Raybould giving any feeling of being pressured. I think she was doing just as much pushback. So I don't buy that she was feeling bullied, and I certainly don't buy that she was in danger of losing her job. She didn't have a job. She's an elected official. The Prime Minister appointed her. She serves in that position at his pleasure, and he is entitled and able to change those positions when he has to or feels he needs to. She was never in danger of losing her job unless the residents of BC are allowed to rescind an election, which I don't think we can do yet, unfortunately. So I think her reasoning, her saying that she felt threatened and in danger of losing her job, and that's why she recorded, is kind of duplicitous.
And so, last thought, I understand that you're not a member or a card-holding member of any political party.
I really like Justin Trudeau, and I also want to point out that Judy Philpott, before she resigned, or as she resigned, said that she believed the Liberal Party has the best suite of programs for Canadians today, and still they did that. So I'm not a card-carrying member, but I might join again after this, because I think he needs all the support he can get. Because what are the alternatives? Conservatives? And they just threw us under the bus this time, these people.
Ronnie, thank you very much for the view from Kitchener.
Thank you very much.
Mohammed Mahani is watching on our Facebook Live. He says, as is the case most of the time, women have to go the distance alone, and often there's no support for them except from themselves. That's why she felt the need to record the call. Scott Jansen in New Westminster, BC, emailed us. It's surprising to me to hear so many callers questioning the motives of JWR in recording a call. Clearly, she was not in the position of power, and she was feeling bullied, and she attempted to defend herself with the facts. The widespread support for the more powerful side of this interaction may give us all an insight into why the practice of bullying continues today, and the victims are hesitant to report. Darren Brush is on the line from Truro, Nova Scotia. Hi, Darren. Welcome to Checkup.
Hi, Duncan. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I hear you've changed your mind, so tell us where you're at.
Well, you keep playing the phone conversation over, and I find the whole conversation was very manipulative on her part, and we're losing. I don't hear a lot in the conversation about the motivation on either side.
Yes.
So we have the government trying to protect the company with the jobs. Now, here in Nova Scotia, if we were about to lose 3,000 or 6,000 or 9,000 jobs, we'd just be floating out into the middle of the ocean because we couldn't handle it. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of jobs. So I get where the Prime Minister's coming from. The company is not getting off. This is not like a previous caller said, a get out of jail card, free card. They're going to be punished. They're going to pay severely. They have a new board of directors. They have a new management team. This was something 10 years ago. It was against the law. They broke the law. They should be punished. But we also have to look at the jobs. And I've changed my mind almost completely on the subject. Now, to me, is was she forceful enough in going? She's in caucus. I'm quite sure she can pick up the phone and probably talk to the Prime Minister anytime she wants to. So yeah, there obviously was some communication breakdown, but she's getting a lot of national attention now, and I don't know. There's something. Is there a coup going on here or what?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, Darren. I think there's lots of people wondering, what what is going on now. So, but let me you go back to the jobs for a second here. I'm glad you're bringing us back to that because we can get caught up, as someone said, in the soap opera of it all. But I mean, it has come out over the course of this past month or so, that SNC-Lavalin itself even has confirmed that it's not clear that there were 9,000 jobs at stake. Gerald Butts, in his testimony, said, "Well, I can't exactly remember who it was that said that there were 9,000 jobs at stake." I mean, is that kind of has that been a red herring at all, or do you think that the jobs were actually at stake?
Well, I think that if they're banned from contracts, government contracts for 10 years, there definitely would be some job loss. The chances, they're a brain trust. How many other places would love to pull them out and take them to their country? So, yeah, I think this is the issue. This is the issue.
Darren, thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze one more caller in at the end here.
Okay, good enough.
Thank you sir. Oliver Vows is on the line from Ottawa. Hi, Oliver. Welcome to Checkup.
Oh, hi, and thanks for having me on.
I got about a minute left, Oliver. Can you take us home?
Yeah, so I just wanted to provide a perspective that I think is missing, which speaks to the question of pressuring and political interference. In her remarks to Wernick in that tape conversation, the former regime is stressing that she feels the independence of the Director of Public Prosecutions is sacrosanct, that in fact she is not allowed to intervene, period. And this makes no sense to me. In fact, Michael Wernick even points out to her that the law allows you to question such decisions and to review it. But she's saying that that in itself would be viewed as political interference. It's very clear in her words. So in my view, what the PM and the clerk was trying to say to her is that, listen, we want you to at least review it and carry out your prerogative that's allowed for you under the law to review the decision that was made. And she was absolutely refusing to do that. And to try to allay any concerns that she might have. They even pointed out, we can bring in some independent legal counsel from a former respected jurist. And even then, she dug in her heels and absolutely refused.
Yeah, so I wonder what Bev McLaughlin thought about having her name bandied about like that. Oliver, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
You're my last caller. That's it for this week. Thank you to everyone who called today. If you missed part of the program, you can listen again anytime online. Go to our website, cbc.ca/checkup. Our podcast is there, the show highlights, or you can join the social media conversation, which is continuing online. If you want quick and easy access to CBC News and programming wherever you go, download the CBC Radio app on your phone. You can get it on Google Play or the App Store. Coming up on CBC Radio 1, as the MPs are returning to the Hill tomorrow, a lot of the spotlight is going to be on the Wednesday caucus meetings. Will Jody Wilson-Raybould and another former cabinet minister, Jane Philpott, continue to stay as Liberals? There's going to be lots of coverage and other reactions on the ongoing SNC-Lavalin saga on the World this weekend. You can email checkup@cbc.ca on Twitter and Facebook. Find us by searching for Checkup CBC. Thanks to everyone who helped this week. Our phone screeners, Julie Takeda, Chuck Molgat, and Latifa Abdin. Program assistant, Caro Rolando. Technical production and editing, Yelena Yurak. Cross Country Checkup was produced this week by Samantha Louie, Shafali Sojani, and Justin Chandler. Digital producer, Jason Vermesh. Our senior producer is Mandy Luck. Jim Miigwech. It's National Indigenous Languages Day today. Happy National Indigenous Languages Day. Jim Miigwech, thanks for listening. I'm Duncan McCue. Bye for now.